I'm Joyce Jenkins from Poetry Flash in Berkeley. We have one more powerful Watershed event for you in this amazing weekend, and this is it. And in this Women's History Month, focusing on writers, nature, and community, awareness for human peace and the climate crisis, environmental justice, all of it. As Patti Trimble quoted Audre Lorde, poetry lays the foundations for a future of change. In the chat box, you'll find a link to the Watershed page on poetryflash.org, where you can see everything that happened at this festival and this year's gorgeous poem broadside, Awake, by Linda Hogan, pressure printed by book artist Lisa Rappaport with real leaves and grasses. There's also a link to our Watershed bookshop, bookshop.org/shop/watershed, where you can find books by these authors. Thanks to Pegasus Books in Berkeley for the bookshop. A shout out to our community partners, Ecology Center, Berkeley Farmers Market, and all of our supporters, especially the Berkeley Civic Arts Program. Okay, so we'd like to start with our first poet, Lisa Rosenberg. And I'm so glad that she can read with us today. She's the author of A Different Physics from Red Mountain Press. Formerly trained in physics and poetry, she worked as an engineer in the space program and speaks frequently on the confluence of arts and sciences. The recipient of a Jurassic residency and Wallace Stegner Fellowship, she served as Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, California. Her publications include poems and essays in venues such as Poetry, the Three Penny Review, Ruminate, and California Fire and Water, a climate crisis anthology. Lisa Rosenberg.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Poetry Flash, and everyone who has made this 26th edition of the Watershed Environmental Poetry Festival possible. I am so grateful and honored to be part of this last event on the last day. I'm going to read just a couple poems from A Different Physics, and then mostly some new material, all of it from convergent landscapes, whether nearby or far off, landscapes of drought and fire. But I want to open with something of an offering and thinking of ecology of mind and thought, and how ecological and environmental thinking really invites us toward abundance and connectedness and interdependencies. And this is called, quite simply, offering. This day, this hour, feast of paradox, of plentitude in the face of how we are taught. Scarcity, its army of thoughts, feeding on the seed ball, now and off again, like the junco or the house finch, red crest and all. The second poem from very close by, it's called Woman from Fire, and it's an ekphrastic piece based on a metal sculpture by the sculptor Rochelle Ford, who lives in Palo Alto and has this amazing Madonna with child built from the remnants of the Oakland fire. Woman from Fire. Our Lady of Rebar, early with child, her limbs cold from the Oakland fire, curled by heat of sheetrock, shingles, books, love letters, wire. Her legs from white porticos, one pipe arm and a sprinkler eye that watered lemon trees for years, when the knobs of her spine lay hidden by mortar and siding until freed. Each bar chosen from the ash, fitted welded fast to hold the smallest hard finding. And what are those findings except these constant reminders of what is cyclical? And I find that hopeful. So now I'm going to read some new work that comes from another landscape, my husband's homeland, which is rural Greece, where we spend as much time as we can. And it's another place where people and creatures and plants live with drought, live with wildfire, and fight over water. For me, it's been a place that, although I've been going there for almost 30 years, I have only recently started to write about. And I think the gift of time to work in longer forms has made that possible, and to discover how parts of our own stories and voices can come through the flora and fauna around us. So this is called Ionian Herbal. It's a prose poem. And I'm going to say the name of each plant, both in Greek and English, at the beginning of the sections. Ionian Herbal. The osmo. Mint. Indestructible. Just ask the crowded cucumbers, the overrun greens, the choked puddle of hose water where creatures drink. No drought or frost can halt this sprite. Not wildfire after wildfire. Fuzz-flowered, untroubled, rhizomes launched from last year's griefs to next year's gleanings. Brief tenderness repeated. Pinch the stems to harvest. Shake off dust. Rinse the ash from leaves. Vascomilo, clary sage. Buy stalks from the woman who harvests on the high ridge. Wrap them straight. Spread the feathery bundles on a clean cloth in a quiet room. Wait, wait. And when you take your swim, and when the family gathers, and when the television plays, but no one is awake, water departs the cells of stem and leaf. Wait. When it has mostly gone, take what remains for tea. Rigani, oregano. Reaped before blooming, hung before threshing, threshed by hand and heaped like weightless grains. Gray-green with a stray twig or two. Run your fingers through, scoop and store. Small tins, tied bags, clean old jars. Uncontainable, sharp air. Kapari, capers. I didn't know the berry from the bush, didn't know the bud except as disembodied, cured, didn't recognize the double edge. Beloved, berated, cultivated, cursed, equally at home on fissured monuments or tended beds. Survivor genes, sheer vibrancy. Dear fleshy, fragrant, thorny, tart, unshakable invader. Unruly source. We cannot praise or punish you enough. Chamomile, chamomile. Darling of weeds, palm-topped. Gone brittle when faded. Bald stars and broken stems I drop in a pot. Let boil, simmer, strain before bitter. Knowing when. Maratho, fennel. Perennial, pungent in heat. Proof there is river nearby. There is sea and bird life, grasses and reeds, sweet in birth and sweet in death. The flat-topped sprays, the lace-thread leaves, the flower heads and fluted seeds pressed between fingers. Infusion, tincture, stalks high above last year's clumps, high above bright sky, thin clouds, brief rain, taller than any of me. Tremidakya, small onions. Onions to die for, swoon over, cupped in your palm, chopped there, falling straight into salad, saucepan, bowl. Unnamed, shallots maybe, mauve skin, red skinned, teardrop bulb and chambered lobe, the sheen at their fullness, the root filaments and scattered peels. Onions a garden remembers, a basket of them and the light of one lemon hanging in a shaded garage. A brown bag filled to the rim, beside other brown bags, crowding a corner shelf. A heap on an outdoor table. The vendor asking for salad or stew, and I think yes, not knowing the subtleties, not caring. I think wet crescents on a bare plate, no cover but oil and herb, piercing, cool, salt of the earth, ready for teeth. Kalamya reads, guardians, whisperers, mythology let you off easy. If I had a secret, you're the last place I'd bury it. Lined up creekside, roadside, edge of the farm, pointing the way to watery greed. Abundance loves you. Wild, bundled, woven as fencing, what and whenever. The lush, wind-fluttered lot of you screaming, nothing to see here, no one to shield, somewhere to get to, somehow to be. That piece always feels, thank you, longer and surprises me every time because I wasn't quite sure what I was writing. And as I was writing, I realized it was becoming a grief journal of sorts, both personal and ecological and in other ways I'm still learning. So I'm going to close with two short poems. One is really like so new, it's still in revision, but it feels timely as mass commercial agriculture always is. Back to California now. State route. Old glory over almond groves and idle backhoes, rental tractors, one gutted school bus, whitewashed, grapevines, power lines and fallows, then rows and rows of swift diagonals, walnut, stone fruit, some saplings too slight to name from year. Distant cirrus, thin glare off hood and windshield. Phone poles and cell towers where eras overlap. Praise the sun, the radio, and all we do not think to praise. Forgive the gas stations, their motley gatherings of lonely flags and lanky fan palms riding toward us like frayed oases unable to amend. And I'm going to finish, I was debating between literal physics and kind of cosmic or spiritual physics. So we'll go for the cosmic or spiritual physics. And this piece is also a prose poem. It's very new, another ekphrastic piece written in response to a blue and white photograph of a sunflower. But it really does speak to, as patterns in nature do, to once again, how we can zoom out, zoom in, find connection and a bigger framework, especially for kinship, I think. Sun, flower. The center of anything has work to do, bearing, spinning, taking things in, sending them out again. Pupil and iris, axle and hub, the dense, dark center of our gathered stars, swathed in what light it hasn't swallowed, dragging bright dust in arced scarves, aster to aster, disc to disc, the way a word begets a world. Say inflorescence, say one bent petal rests on the rim, a tear, an inflection. Say the mind travels there, a foot explores the unexpected curve. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa Rosenberg. Thank you so much. That was lovely. Thank you. Next, we have Caroline Goodwin. Caroline, you are in the house, correct?
I'm in the house.
You're in the house. Caroline Goodwin served as the first poet laureate of San Mateo County. An Alaska native, her new poetry collection is Old Snow, White Sun. Eileen Casaneto said it traverses various terrains with grace and a commitment to astonishment. Her previous books include Trapline, Peregrine, The Paper Tree, and Custody of the Eyes. Caroline Goodwin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joyce and Poetry Flash and all the other wonderful poets sharing the stage today. I'm a little anxious. I'm sitting here with my heart pounding. I'm very grateful to be here with you and to put faces to people who I've admired for a long time. Now I see you, and yeah, just thanks so much. And the beautiful, beautiful photographs at the beginning that just make me think of, how important poetry is, and how we speak to one another, and who we've lost, and how they'll always be with us. And very, very moving. So I'm super grateful. And I also have, it's crazy. I have another book out from Big Yes Press, who Paula Lowe, many of you know her as well. So, but I will be reading today from Old Snow, White Sun, and this is one poem in 5 sections. It's a poem called Unreadable Book That Will Not Close, and that is a line from a Rue Borson poem. Rue Borson, the Canadian poet, her poem called Mothlight ends with this line, Unreadable Book That Will Not Close. And just a little context, when I lost my husband in 2016, I took a sort of pilgrimage to Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories in Canada, just a healing journey. And it was very powerful. And so you'll hear some of that in this poem, that experience. I was going to go and finish writing my memoir, but I got distracted by Rue Borson's collection that was at the bookstore, and I just spent all my time with poetry instead. So it was pretty great. Okay. Unreadable Book That Will Not Close. If you can see the metal sky, the plate-shaped lily pad, the woolly bear and loon, the friend at my heart, my forehead, both my hands moving and reliable, with a stitch, now looping through the rushes, herb mercury, spurge family, with its attending lance-shaped leaves, and a long June sunset over a northern lake, and a pair of grebes cackling, all shapes on deck, all muted colors, call to power, fleur-de-lis, the bog spruce will hold out hope. When I notice the painting, I cover my eyes, and a few fires blaze up to the south. If you can hear me dream, if you can preserve the stringed instrument with a bit of patience, it won't be the moth poem, it won't be the rose poem, or even the hibiscus, which is the source of a black dye that was used for varying purposes in the East. or the low, trailing evergreen bearberry with its waxy urn-shaped flowers saying, here now, hold me again and again. No, look now for a thin page with very light ink, or a pelican feather, or better yet, a creature long extinct, hatching from the mouth of the old mine. And tell me how it goes again, that song, woman at the fountain, man tipping his hat, some kind of pledge or plea. The grebes are just that silhouette, and the sky now a violet curtain. Here at the muddiest end of the marsh, I fall on my knees. Whose ghost moves over the floor? Whose jewel colors in the cattails? Today there is the report of snow geese dead on the shores of Cambridge Bay, too many to count, the newsman says. Who carried in the muskox horns and skull, the valuable pelt, the snowshoes? Atlantic salmon escape into the Pacific during a terrific windstorm. Retka says, any old stick, pie tin, or pencil's material to beat out the meter of happy bones. I say bumblebee, or a malamute in winter, the Arctic sky, the oldest rock in the world. I say Nunavut, Yellowknife, Tuktoyaktuk, the Gold Range, or Ragged Ass Road, or V Lake, or a birthright of snow, or my own exhausted body in the canoe. Horsetail makes a pleasant sound in the wind. It is the sound of mending, or of a small waterfall. It is not the sound of the playground or of the tetherball chain. At the back of the house, the pallets, the rusty nails, the place where my grandmother sat down to rest in the rain. At first light, the water stills, and a family of ducks, simple mallards in the green, shaking and dipping their bills methodically, astonishes me. Every night you held me comes back in the rain, every embrace and harsh word. The fact that I continue in my body, in this web of red lace, makes it possible, makes it all surrender, the heart a door, makes your voice a refrain for the stay-at-homes. It arrives in the wee hours filled with myth. The goose barnacle is a tree that bears birds instead of fruit. The skullcap is truly a tranquilizer. And what? When you see me perusing the edge of the lake, my ankle adorned with the leech, my veins all bright blue. It is only August, so what will it take? The softening properties of the slippery elm, a lubricant to ease labor. Modern herbalists list an extract of moccasin flower root as a sedative, especially for nervousness, hysteria, and anxiety, accompanied by insomnia. All night, the sensation in my spine between the shoulder blades, a twisting like wool in a drop spindle. If I could even begin to report the actual depth of my longing. The hunter waits in a boat on the south side of the Porcupine, rifle on his thighs, where the river is a length of gray chain, and these bookshelves you built me, and a line of thin smoke climbing, and how light comes up off the lake. If I hold the ulu at the correct angle, I can split fibers from the hide. At dawn, a pair of tall birds works the shore. They are not graceful. They cackle and squawk. They say lichen. They say caribou, muskrat, will-o'-the-wood, whippoorwill, walk through the valley, common loon, and whistling swan and wolf. I say, go ahead and give me your hand again. I say, come on back. Through these old shadows and reticulated fronds, through the peat, through the mute silt, opening your stupid wings. So that is Unreadable Book That Will Not Close from Old Snow White Sun. Thank you very much for listening to that poem. And I'm going to switch over and read just a few from Matanuska, which came out over in Wales in the UK from Aquifer Press. And the Matanuska River runs through south central Alaska, where I was born and raised, and also where I took my first creative writing class from Ken Waldman, Alaska's fiddle and poet, who some of you might know, my very first creative writing teacher from the 90s. This book, all you have to know is that the titles of these poems I'm going to read the title, it's a long sequence of poems, and it's my COVID project, and they, each poem is titled after a moment's worldwide COVID-19 death count and the name of a wild plant from, I have to peek at the title, Discovering Wild Plants, Alaska, Western Canada, the Northwest by Janice Schofield. And so I took a bit of text from this textbook and I repeat it 3 times throughout the poem. So the first line will get repeated 3 times. And these are just collage poems with some sounds and strangeness to them. So I hope you enjoy. This is Lady Fern on June 6, 2020 at 0654 Pacific Daylight Time. The worldwide COVID-19 death count was 378,120. Lady Fern. As they lie coiled beneath the surface waiting for warm weather, as burning the fronds would repel serpents, gnats, and other noisome creatures, as the owls make their home in the steeple, and something buzzes in the understory like wasps or a cricket rasping, and you hold the vetch, me the lesser evil, bracken or shield, a row of spores, and how we believe in the prospect of escape in sticks to light our way, or crumbs or strings of bark heating up, as they lie coiled beneath the surface waiting for someone to notice, there by the playground, that path on the outskirts of town, and who gives a hoot? Our lot is misfortune, and do we ever? And here's how to roll a Marlboro between your fingers, to empty the flakes, to sprinkle the soil, as they lie coiled beneath the surface, waiting. Wild Flag on April 13th, 2020, 1036 Pacific Daylight Time, 117,758. Wild Flag. Irises, their word for rainbow on the graves of deceased female relatives. In the memorial bouquet, the tin of shells, the Rufus night jar where I slept alone, heard the ice tell of it, that sacrament where glass and ammunition, where inoculation in the faraway hillside, where for a time they lived in bliss and blooms, heat rising between them, a helix of smoke, a single wasp, the drifted ashore house, the new living irises, their word for rainbow on the graves, on the tussocks, the shell mounds, the Arctic ribbon, blue tea light, knives, where I planted 5 to 10 drops of tincture, this arrangement of dark veins of loons, and all the summer upon this lake, this bruise and heart fist, this carapace, at my face against the coming night, bright irises, their word for rainbow on the graves. Just about 2 years ago, 3/22/2020, 0830 Pacific Daylight Time, 14,613. Sitka Great Burnet. Blend with other tonic herbs such as dandelion root and flower spikes. Colored, pinnately compound, the styptic qualities of the plant's leaves, sanguisorba, and a photograph, a hospital bed, a blue flame. After the float plane docks, oxygen, my hand at the throat, as if the land had pinched it, windpipe, there were starfish, and they were 6-legged, rough-skinned, reddish in color, over easy if you stood at the bedside. If the newborn, blend with other tonic herbs such as dandelion root, and a couple of emergency vehicles to stem the flow, to dam. What other objects filled the torso, the limb torn if I bit you? A soft cape of petals gathered, a little gasp, a thistle, and you rising, and a house finch at the glass tapping, and someone stopped the very arrival, the quickening spirit, as if it never existed, as if we hadn't spent ourselves like that in this earth, blend with other tonic herbs such as dandelion root. And I will read one more, and that will be my time. And I thank you very much. And this is the last poem in the sequence. June 22nd, 2020, 0941 Pacific Daylight Time, 471,680 ladies smock. Based on the doctrine of signatures, a European method popular in the 1600s, associated the healing powers with resemblance to human anatomy, human growth according to its benefits, its rituals, or nine bark, streambed, riverbank, chosen landscape, women's work, nursery, catalog, tea rose, picket fence, copper kettle, a cotton cloth embroidered with blue flax flowers, a pot holder, a bruise there, if you would just in the driveway. And what I meant to say was, based on the doctrine of signatures, a European bushel of Timothy, the moment by which you judge the other pane, the pinprick of light at the eye's edge. And this for your own good, the snap, crackle, cobweb, the moth wing caught. And he's so sorry. And say this then, buckle up. It happens. The raised hand, the nosegay, the river mouth repeating, pearly everlasting, and Eden, based on the doctrine of signatures, a European. Thank you so very much for your time and attention, and be well, carry on.
Thank you, Caroline Goodwin. That was wonderful. Our next reader is Patti Trimble, who will be reading with musician Peter Whitehead. Patti Trimble is an award-winning poet, painter, and essayist on environmental concerns in the arts. She's walked miles in the wilderness, co-founded Tuolumne Poetry Festival in Yosemite, wrote for the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival, and for many years performed spoken word in the US and Europe. She lives in Petaluma and Sicily, and one of her paintings of flora has been made into a banner that hangs at every in-person Watershed festival. Peter Whitehead, originally from England, is a longtime Bay Area composer, performer, songwriter, and instrument builder. He performs solo and creates scores, composing music for dance, film, television, and radio. He and Patti have been performing and recording together for 10 years. You can listen on Spotify. Please welcome Patti Trimble and Peter Whitehead.
Hi, I'm on. So I'm going to talk about this to begin with. The first piece I'm going to read is the longer piece of two that I'm going to read. And the first one, I started writing a song of the earth by myself, and I realized I needed some company. And I realized that I was thinking about the way that we all carry places in our heads. And there's a certain point in life when earth kind of sears a vision into your head and you never forget it. So I started asking people what that was for them. So I have here a found poem, or an inquired poem, an investigated poem. And the words are not mine. They are a question I asked of people: what is a very special place you've always had in your head? And what it ends up being is this map, really, of Earth that is carried around the world in people's heads. And I live in Sicily part of the year, so I was able, when I was down there, to interview refugees that had taken boats from Tunisia and from sub-Saharan Africa originally, and Syria, and also expats and travelers, and some of my American friends. And this poem is actually very long. I'm just doing an excerpt from it. And last time it was performed by 40 actors, each of them repeating one of these places over and over again in a museum of contemporary art in Sicily. And I don't know if you can imagine that, but I'm going to read it myself today. Mm-hmm. What do I remember? There was this place with roads, lots and lots of roads, pretty much everywhere you looked. In my mind, there is a view, a volcano, and below it is the greenest of green fields you have ever seen. On the patio, my brother sits in a chair while preparing for a journey. He would just sit there and look out and look and look, and as if he could imbibe the massive mountain and its weight. My dad's village is called Gingama. I have not been there for 5 years. It's hard to explain. I can see the hills and the trees, the monkeys and cows, the antelope. The river stays in one place to defend us from Mauritania. They are hard to defeat. I can see the trees. I can see the hills. I can see birds. I can see ostriches. That is all. Naples. I'd say Naples. So often I think about it. I remember my grandmother's room, doilies on the arms of chairs, excessive pillows, crochet-colored wools. On every tabletop and dresser, there are many small things: rosary beads, crucifixes, plaster Madonnas, perfume bottles. The walls are crowded with pictures: Mary and Jesus, me at my graduation. I remember a Singer sewing machine and a tabletop TV. I can't remember anything ever happening in there. I remember dews in the Sahara. On a parched hill, a row of women walked to get water, carrying jars on their heads. Their clothes flew in the wind. They walked like ballerinas, like queens. I remember clearly a forest high in the California mountains of aspen trees, their leaves shining in gold, and the bark was white. This kind of forest moves forward like a crowd of many people, too slow to see, but still there is this crowd of slender, graceful, golden people going forward. The trees extend their roots and grow new trees ahead and pull themselves forward, traveling slowly into the valley and back again. My aunt had a little house, just one room made of black lava stone from Stromboli, facing the sea and facing the volcano. The house was in a black crater, half a crater. The other half had washed into the sea. In my mind, I just remember trees, large, tall trees, so many. Palm trees, is that how you call them? Many, many palm trees, and for us this was strange, because we had always lived in the city, where we'd never seen trees before. I did not know what to do. Well, we went into a cave hidden by caper vines, a home for goats. The air smelled like water. When our eyes became accustomed to the dark, we could make out processions of yellow circles on the walls, chipped and faded, barely there. And they were faces, staring, the saints. They didn't mind us being there. My friend and I crossed through Burkina and Egypt and finally arrived in Libya. And we saw that there, even normal people carried Kalashnikovs. The Hazma boys threw us into prison. I remember it, but I cannot say this part again. I cannot repeat. I will stop now. The places that calmed my mind are the main streets of Baghdad. On Abu Nawas Street near the Tigris, my friend and I used to walk at night. There are always people out. There is a sculpture about Shahryar and Shahrazad from Arabian Nights. And on Al-Qadima Street, there is a shrine for a Shia spiritual man. The beauty about it is when you are inside it, you feel people's intentions of purity, cleansing, and spirituality, which forces peace to enter your heart. Yes, I can see a special place in my mind. Yes, I see it. And no, I don't want to tell you. It was a summer evening. I remember I was aged 4 near my house in Kent, England. My dad and I saw a waterfall between willow trees. I heard water rushing and saw a horse cart and a horse in the water at the edge of the waterfall. The sunlight was behind the horse and the horse glowed. The horse stayed still, its head hanging down. And that's all. Water, sun, and this glowing horse. It looked like an illusion, though it was there in front of me. Once I saw a painting by Laura Owens in the Contemporary Art Museum with squidges of thick oil paint in the shape of leaves. I've never forgotten it, like a forest or a garden. Does this count as a place? It feels as though I've been there. I can still see it, 1,000 tents, barbed wire, guards, families with nothing. And there were these 3 children singing, "In the jungle, the mighty jungle." There's a cafe in Jerusalem near the Damascus Gate where we sat every morning to hear the church bells, the muezzin singing the prayer call, and watch the crowds in the street, Hebrew students singing, soldiers with machine guns joking around. I was in a boat, and then there was only water when the boat turned over. I was in the water and I couldn't swim and I couldn't think. I grabbed a rope. I just saw this rope and I grabbed it. I thought only about myself. I am a Bangla boy. I passed through India and Pakistan with only my feet to walk, and a few times a bus. I walked. I kept walking through Iran, Turkey, Egypt, Libya, because I knew in Italy there were Bangladesh people who would talk to me. Oh, I would say the house I was born in and brought up in. In my mind, I can picture it. We had no electricity. We played soccer in the square in the dirt. I have always had a spiritual connection to it. There is a boat. We were in the Mediterranean. It was crowded, and people divided up right down the middle. Muslims sitting and standing on one side, Christians on the other. There was no one father. The sea was so bad. So now we fear the sea. I don't want to even look at it from far away. I never want to remember the giant waves and the feeling you have in the stomach when you're on top of the wave and are about to fall. You lose all the breath you have in your mouth. But now I'm talking about this to you for the first time, and it makes me laugh. The waves were so tall when we rode up to the top of the wave. All the Muslims were praying, Allah, Allah. And all the Christians were playing, Jesus, Jesus. Then when we fell down all the way to the bottom of the trough, the Muslims were praying, Jesus, Jesus. And the Christians were praying, Allah, Allah. Thank you. And I have one short poem to read that I wrote, and I wrote it for, I think, obvious reasons. I told myself, listen. I told myself, listen. And I went to the garden and I listened, turning to the bees and the jay baby cocking his head, chucking in my direction. I told myself, listen. I walked to the marsh where the bittern was booming, baritone low, and the burned trees stood silent. And in the evening, washing the dishes, listening to drops beat on the roof, and wondering, must I really take out the compost on this rainy night? And then I listened to the news and told myself, listen harder, attend, heed. And then it terrified me, the sound of Earth's wild will. I heard with all of my being beyond and beside me, the din of the planet, determined and strangely sublime. I don't mean the usual sound of whirring round the axis and spinning across galaxies, lassoing the moon, but a louder song, a humming unimaginable, the unfathomable response of Earth to us. Listen, I was told, the Arctic is ominously warm. The permafrost unmitigated melting shift will make a land of far less ice and an unfamiliar greener land in 20% of the northern hemisphere. I hear that in far off, too close dark, and the dark conclusions, microbes releasing carbon up and up, hearing the counting, the billions of tons, do the sums, twice what's there now above. Listen to this humming, trembling news. So how can I work? I'm trying to write poems, to walk in the woods and write regenerative myths of 5-foot greening shoots reaching from ash black roots of the California fire. I'm trying to celebrate how trees in their cerebellum cambium stammer oxygen up to the sky, how unseen earthly practices bless us, teach us, and hold. While all the while, behind, below, above, the grander noise of earth sings an actual, factual shape of our inclusion, the cacophony of water, wind, and fire. I am trying to write a book. You are trying to write a poem, raise a child, build a home, drive a car. Congress is trying to regain its dignity. People are in the streets, in earth, in protest. Louder, humming, rattling, blowing, singing its earth song. And oh, so clearly the only earthy response it knows to the largesse, the excess of our endless making.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patti Trimble and Peter Whitehead. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for the
Thank
opportunity
you.
to read.
Thank you. Next, we have Barbra Jane Reyes. She was born in Manila, Philippines, and was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's the author of Letters to a Young Brown Girl, poems that you can find a review of at poetryflash.org. And her brand new book, published this week, is Wanna Peek into My Notebook? Notes on Panay Liminality. Her previous books include Gravities of Center, Poeta and San Francisco, which received the James Laughlin Award of the Academy of American Poets, Diwata, which received the Global Filipino Literary Award for Poetry, Love is Aswang, and Invocation to Daughters, more books of hers. She teaches in the University of San Francisco's Yochinko Philippine Studies program, and I'm just so happy that she could read today. Barbra Jane Reyes. Barbra Jane.
Hi, thank you so much, Joyce, and thank you, Poetry Flash, for having me here. And fellow poets, I'm so happy to hear your words, so thank you so much for that. I'm gonna begin with a poetics essay from the book that just was released this week. And the book is called Wanna Peek into My Notebook? Notes on Panay Liminality. It was published by Eileen Casaneto's press, Paloma Press. And I had been asked to write, I'd been asked by the New York Times to write about my summer rituals, and I thought this is an opportunity for a poetics essay. Communing with redwoods on the California coast. My summers, for at least the past decade, have found me and my husband fleeing the illegal fireworks spectacles and screeching sideshows in Oakland and heading into the Santa Cruz Mountains, down to the Monterey Peninsula and across the iconic Bixby Bridge into Big Sur. In coastal redwood groves, I eavesdrop on children marveling at the oldest of the trees. It's so tall, it's as tall as the moon, one says to the other. I think that line will end up in a poem I'll write soon. I can't help but hug these giant trees and come away with my hair and arms covered with spider webs. I thank them for sharing their space and whisper, "Excuse us, we're just passing through." Loggers cut down many of the eldest redwoods over a century ago, but the trees' daughters grow in circles or fairy rings surrounding the stumps, and fallen trunks are covered with moss and mushrooms, turkey tail, pink edge bonnet. We wonder what creatures or spirits reside in the hollowed out trunks. Along the almost dried out creek beds, the blackberry bramble is thick and painful, but it offers a perfect place to be still and spy on swallowtail butterflies. We climb uphill, and the terrain beneath the redwood canopies, soft and cool, covered with branches and needles. Their root systems sprawl and push up earth into staircases. Still further uphill, we clear the tree line, and the terrain is now fine white sand, what remains of an ancient ocean. Redwoods have given way to fragrant sagebrush, to twisted, smoothed red bark manzanitas, to ponderosa pine, and we watch the woodpeckers wage turf warfare upon one another. On the Monterey Peninsula, we find sea otters floating on their backs in the kelp. Off the coast of Pacific Grove and Point Lobos, and at the entrance to Moss Landing Harbor, where they roll their bodies around in the water, huffing and scrubbing their fur. We sit on the rocks and watch them, no more than 2 meters away from us, unbothered by our presence. On the other side of the breakwater, an otter dives into the surf and emerges with shellfish to crack open on its furry belly. The harbor seals are now pupping on the shores, and the salt air is filled with their barking. In the scrub of the Salinas River beach dunes, we count the tiny brush rabbits darting into their burrows. All of these things tell me something about poetry. Observing life sprouting from fallen, burnt, dead things. The stillness and silence required to watch a single hummingbird drinking the nectar of monkey flowers. Our smallness under the 200-foot-tall, 1,000-year-old trees. Spotting a kestrel or a Cooper's hawk hovering above us at the peak of a mountain. I think of that Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, The Wind Hover. The hurl and gliding, rebuff the big wind, my heart in hiding, stirred for a bird. As a lapsed, failed Catholic, 8 years at Holy Spirit School in Fremont, 4 years at Moreau Catholic School in Hayward, I think my church is here on the mountain, under the redwoods, by the sea. When I was growing up in suburban Fremont, not too far from all this beauty, color, and texture, I didn't know the names of trees or flowers or creatures. I'm sure I asked my parents, and I'm sure that they bought me and my sisters books and took us to the public library as their way of telling us to look it up ourselves. The natural world was a faraway place, beyond what we could see from the car window on family road trips, to Cannery Row, to Hearst Castle, to Solvang, and ultimately to Disneyland. Finding the trails leading up into the mountains, away from safe and tame tourist attractions, souvenir shops, and public restrooms, was not something we did. I didn't know we could. How many painstakingly composed family photos do I have of my 3 sisters, my parents, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, wearing clean white sneakers and clean blue jeans, cameras slung around their necks, American place names printed across newly purchased t-shirts. I found so many of these photos in my grandfather's home in the small Philippine town of Cataran, a harrowing 12-hour bus ride northeast of Manila. These were the keepsakes we sent home to show our large extended family what our American lives were like. Our summers full of comfort, leisure, and safety. I would like to think my grandfather would recognize me now, not as the pristinely clothed teenager safely distanced from buzzing, crawling, skittering things, but his 50-year-old American granddaughter emerging from the brush, covered in sweat, burrs, bug bites, scratches, and cuts from so much bramble, rocks in my socks and shoes, my legs coated with dust and mud, smelling like the sun, with a head full of poems waiting to be written down. I wanted to kind of just open up with that. Thank you so much. And just kind of pay tribute, I guess, to my family, right? As they're all growing elderly and ultimately passing away. Okay, and I will read about 2 or 3 pieces from Letters to a Brown Girl, which, right in the middle of the book is this playlist. So I wrote poems after just these songs that I realized I'd been listening to as kind of my soundtrack, since I was, like a hormonal 13-year-old girl who needed music in her life. Brown Girl sings Whale Song, which I wrote while I was listening to Romeo Void's song, A Girl in Trouble is a Temporary Thing. When they say you are as big as a lumpy, blubbery whale, you may go ahead and bellow deep, creak, croon, and trill, moan low, Go ahead, open your mouth so wide that you can swallow the sea. Know that your blood pulls you through what your oldest ancestors committed to heart. Remember, you have touched the ocean floor and you have made your garden there. Remember, your skin is thick. Remember, no one has tamed you. Yes, you are immense. Your lifespan and memory long. Your heart larger than a full-grown man. Your lungs carry air for us all. Your rib cage could be a refuge. Your skull is a deep cavern of song. Through murk and poison, you move true with the moon. Your body lights a million lanterns. Your deep-pitched song finds your sisters and your mother. They say the earth's most unruly parts sing like you. Brown girl has walked into the wild, palms open. See how she lists. The body is bent as light, as wind will it. And so you must tread light. Mind the rocks underfoot. You must tread slow. There has been drought. See where water has long ago troughed, has carved her. See how she branches, twisting, her many hands reaching. Her roots also reach, sweetened from reaching. When fire arrives, she toughens. She will slough away the thick. She will be slick and dark beneath the rough. She will mimic the fire her bones remember. No, her bones glisten. See how she rests. The body will fall as time wills it. See how it hollows, how her pieces return to earth. And from her thick trunk, mushrooms cluster. Her belly a nest of moss and toxins. When broken open, see what of her mother she has kept, what of her father, and what of the stars. And I will end with one of the letters. It says, Dear Brown Girl, I do have just pages and pages and pages of these epistolary poems. Dear Brown Girl, what is there to fear in your silence? When you do not speak, do you hear your own footfalls, your breath, your measured gait? Can you feel tension and give of earth with every step? Can you feel how terrain changes underfoot? What does this tell you about the sprawl and tangle of roots? About seeds that open only when fire comes? What happens when you pay attention? What happens when you step outside of words? What do you learn about heartbeat? Can you hear the single leaf fall to the soil? And when there is a rustle through limbs, through hollowed trunks, do you know what living thing moves in the underbrush? Can you see its tracks? Can you catch its scent? If you know how to listen, there is an entire language of water and earth, wings and husks and legs, heat and birth. What do you find when you sit with yourself inside your silence? And I'm going to maybe read one more poem. It's a short poem. And this is part of my Brown Girl mixtape in the middle of the book. Do you know how old you were when you first saw the ocean? How old you were when the ocean first touched you? How old you were when you knew you were the ocean? Do you remember its cradle and nudge, its pull and boom, your skin shocked by your own pinpricks and ice? Do you remember sinking? How were you ever so new, swaying into something so immense, so beyond sight? Do you remember tasting slip, sand, and swell? How were you ever anything but a siren singing sea and woman skin gliding in quiet light filtered through blue-green, filtered through plastic and shard? Do you remember the rocks? And how old were you when you returned? That's what I have for you folks this afternoon. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara Jane Reyes. Thank you so much for joining us today. Beautiful. Especially that second to last poem, which you know is one of my favorites. Thank you for reading that. Our next poet is Marsha de la O. And I am so honored and pleased to have her with us today. She's the author of Every Ravening Thing, Antidote for Night, which is winner of the Isabella Gardner Award, and Black Hope, winner of the New Issues Press Poetry Prize. She also won an Editor's Choice Small Press Book Award. Other awards include the Morton Marcus Poetry Award. She's published extensively, including poems in the New Yorker, Kenyon Review, and Prairie Schooner. She produces poetry readings and events in Ventura County with her husband, poet-editor Phil Taggart, that I think I saw earlier as her tech support. So thank you, Phil. And she's an editor of the literary journal Spillway. Chase Twitchell said, "Every Ravening Thing is the most exciting book I've read in a very long time. At its heart is a profound empathy for human suffering of all kinds, but the poems offer neither solace nor cure. Each feels like a brave experiment that extracts a question from the world, then answers it. In almost every poem, I feel an unanticipated shock of recognition, which happens only when profundity, clarity, and a fierce allegiance to truth combine in one intelligence." So, Marsha de la O.
Thank you to everyone who worked to put together the Watershed Environmental Poetry Festival. It's a tremendous and essential endeavor, and that you do it every year in service to all living things is amazing. And it's a big honor to be part of it. And this has been a beautiful reading. I appreciate everything I've heard. I have 5 poems to share. The first poem is called Gods in Ruins, which is a phrase from Emerson, but also addresses the theme of the reading, which is the sacred and where it resides. Gods in Ruins. Today, a crow stopped me. Something invisible wound around her neck. Fish line? Feathers effaced and raw skin flagrant. No perch. She's on the concrete, dipping her head toward puddle water in the gutter. Throat yoked tight, as though wearing a necklace of red beads. Just at the edge of motion and stillness, And now this thirst, this desire for a last sip of water, if she can dip her beak, bring it up, tilt her head back at the right angle, and she manages slowly, as though she understands her life has run out. How not to think of Emerson? How not to think of the way he spoke of man, of us as gods in ruins. And his emphasis was gods, but oh, the ruins. If he could see all we've brought to this pass, how even dying, a creature's not permitted return to the wild. Thank you. Mostly when we consider the nature of ruins for life around us, it comes down to loss or degradation of habitat. My next poem is called Gray Fox. It's set in Santa Barbara on the Douglas Preserve, which is tremendously valuable coastal land left undeveloped for its non-monetary value to the life it sustains. Gray Fox. Years later, on the headlands, chevrons of seed stalks brim with light. Midsummer in a parched year, feral tang of eucalyptus slumps the air. Walking slowly, scanning for her coat of ash and gold in an arid field, the neat triangle of her face. So long I've known this animal since my daughter was a child and first saw her, stretched out her arm to the dark rimmed eyes holding our gaze in afternoon flecked with summer's ending. She's a drift of gold in dry air, topaz of her stare regarding us, stopping time, this moment carried with me since leaf shadow, mottled shade, now disappearing into, now vanishing, but here, this whole way with me on the other side, her sharp face, time past and time to come, hope like electricity in a cloud, that this wildness should last, that she holds on, that she found a way to pass life through her. Thank you. This next poem is a longer poem. It addresses the life of Gerard Manley Hopkins, who revolutionized the position of the sacred relative to the natural world in the English language. It's called The Seer and the Scene. Hopkins was a scholar of Greek and Roman philosophers, and the poem includes some language from Plotinus, who was a Roman philosopher. The Seer and the Scene. It has an epigraph from Hopkins. All things, therefore, are charged with love, and if we know how to touch them, give off sparks and take fire. Gerard Manley Hopkins. If fish could swim into air and feed on brilliance, that light thrashed frenzy, that glory cloud of jots and zags, gold dragonflies with golden wings, and he in their midst, almost as if they called him, almost as if to say, here, stranger, you can safe keep your love here. Say it was like that. The stars are like letters that inscribe themselves every moment, whispers Plautinus across centuries. And didn't the diminutive Jesuit seek to describe them? Didn't he translate as best he could? He came to his writing desk, which was failure, whenever he could bear it. If Plautinus was right, then he is right. Desire is seated in the soul, and iridescence dwells in the retina. If it is not possible to distinguish between the seer and the seen, then God must be present both in the world and our gaze. Attentions lifted and carried a man gathered into the visible, so utterly landscape unladens itself. Love loosens, that's it. The new word is inscape. The cornea is nourished by tears. At the moment of greatest intensity comes the next moment, the cant of the seen world, the warp, the question of lack, father flaw, father daft, separation. He died in a crumbling stone house in Dublin, his city of exile, believing his poems would never be seen. Near the end, he insisted something terrible had happened to his eyes. The old story said, dragonflies like us are capable of harm. Eye pokers, darning needles, they sew your lids shut. On that last walk out, he imposed on himself the discipline of the eyes, his penance, looking down, his refusal. But he could not choose not to feel the gaze from the emissary, green bound in its body, tendril, twine, twirled, to raise his face, be held in the stem, the life rush between them, to behold leaf light like a headwind of ecstasy, like a drift of ether, like a loose halo. After some time, returned to where pain kept him. Say it's mostly about loss then, except maybe he disappeared into joy in those weeks of fever, a thorn flicking loose in the cornea and ripping sideways, the sheath torn, as vision filmed over dragonflies swarmed, as light snows, as they blizzard air with gold, oh, star shapes, to take in fully that fire changes everything, how lucent the flames where love burns. Thank you. The English language came late to expressing the idea of the sacred in the natural world. So many other cultures had it. The next poem is called The Essence of Water, which is a phrase from the Upanishads, which is Vedic scripture. The essence of water. A dove calls, turning its small motor over and over again. Late July, a grove of California live oaks. The old weavers spin their sugar, luff out oxygen, light falling through beveled leaves onto leaves below, something like presence rustling in the silence. All creatures know to stay still, hoping to hold on to their one life. If I had to do it all over again, beginning with a true reckoning, would fear be torn out by its roots? And now wind, invisible stream blowing east, one quantity contained in another, the lungs of the Pacific breathing out in the afternoon, jangling sunlight, each leaf a transparency, each leaf a prism. The Upanishads say, the essence of all beings is the earth. The essence of earth is water. And the essence of water is the tree. Above the trunks and spreading limbs, soft spheres of lit moisture, fine spun, the hours reworking their boundaries. If we could let their equivalents move through our bodies, surely we would know something of their quietude. What would be enough to enter the peace of oaks? It takes so much trust to walk out alone, contained in otherness, to let dusk fill the valley and overflow the hilltops, to step into 1,000-fold of leaves, light slipping away, wavering, shadows floating in air. And I want this courage. I want to walk alone at night beneath the skirts of leaves and reach up to touch the hem, just close enough. As darkness sharpens the moon's golden knife and wind stirs pianissimo in the crown, each leaf must be a syllable of permission, a way to say, yes, let touch teach me. Thank you. This next poem addresses that fear of being alone at night in the wild that was expressed in the essence of water, that fear and that need to seek after presence. It's called To Be Unprotected. Alone, under a blue cloud, backlit by a quarter moon in a dry wash, I wanted starlight to bend low, brush my face and bare arms. There's a thirst inside syntax for what can't be told. Night breaking against a bowl of mountains, heart ticking each unit of flux. When I say I heard it I mean, I felt its song on my skin in needles and shards, raining like flakes from a hammerstone. Feathered, rippled, stroke struck. Inside my body, a hum or tremble in a place where I keep fear. Outside, a glister, a lilt, falling as sound from stars, like tin, like salt, like silt. Words can't mean the same thing twice. When I say I thought I might die of beauty, I mean it broke me apart. I had to give in. Let night drape a garment of sound over my human form. Let words yearn towards silence under the piano of starlight, its soft percussion. If wild is psalm and singer, let it wash over, empty me, and make use of my emptiness. I am willing. Thank you. And this last poem is set in Ukraine 30 years after Chernobyl. When they moved everyone 30 years ago out of the abandoned zone, which was and is 1,600 square miles. Many of the people they moved were very rural people. They were villagers, and they moved them into Kyiv. And some of those people could not yet get used to living in apartment blocks in that great city. And so on their own and against the law, they went back to live in their villages in the abandoned zone. They reclaimed their cottages. 30 years later, all the men had passed on, and the 100 or so who were left were in their 80s. They were all old women. So the poem is called To the Grandmothers. Old women with side gardens and jars of moonshine alone in empty villages. Tell me, solitary lynx, multitudinous wolf pack, how do you do it? All my life, I've lived in cities, bought food from grocery stores. What's it like to return to the abandoned zone on foot, reclaim your cottage beside the dank canal, to howl, to hunt in packs, to foal calves, fill trees, lie down in the bodies of swans and swim in cooling ponds? Why would you fly 3,000 miles to build a nest inside the cracked concrete sarcophagus over the remains of reactor 4? She grins, hands over a jelly jar of vodka, the good stuff. Motherland is motherland, she says. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marsha. Marsha de la O. Wonderful. Thank you. Really, thank you. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Linda Hogan, who, despite moving and tech issues and all kinds of stuff, is here with us today. And we're so grateful. We're so very grateful. Linda Hogan is Chickasaw. She's a poet, novelist, essayist, teacher, and environmentalist. Her recent poetry collection is Dark Sweet, New and Selected Poems, and that is the book that our annual poetry broadside from Watershed to commemorate Watershed in that year has been taken from. Her poem Awake. Her books include the Book of Medicines, a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. She's also a novelist, wonderful novelist. People of the Whale, Solar Storms, and Power. Her essay collection, The Radiant Lives of Animals, which I call a radiant book, received the inaugural 2022 National Book Foundation Science and Literature Award. Concerned that human lives in the natural world are too often defined by people who are separated from the land and its inhabitants, Linda depicts her own intense relationships with animals as an example we can all follow to heal our souls and reconnect with the spirit of the world. She draws on many native nations, ancient stories, and spiritual traditions to show us that the soul exists in those delicate places where the natural world extends into human consciousness. In the midst of morning, the grass that grew a little through the night, the first warmth of this morning's sunlight. Joy Harjo calls her work Words for Healing. Please welcome Linda Hogan. Can you, you need to be unmuted.
I asked her to unmute her.
Yeah. So unmute yourself. Yes, Linda,
Hi.
welcome.
I cannot believe I'm here. I just moved in here on Thursday, and it's a mess everywhere except behind me. And maybe back there too, I don't know. I'm just going to read from A History of Kindness, which is my newest book of poetry. And Marsha, I am your fan. I just want you to know that. And that was like an incredible reading. Thank you. And thank you, Joyce. Just over the years, we've known each other so well. And thank you, everybody who's here. I appreciate this moment. And I'm going to read poetry. You have two poets in a row. I hope that's not too much for anybody. What? I'm just kidding. No, of course it's not. But I'm going to begin reading a poem called Eagle Feather Prayer. And it's from, all of these are from A History of Kindness. I thank the eagle and old mother for this prayer I send to earth and sky and to the sacred waters. I thank old mother and the golden eagle. They are the ones who taught me to pray with no words. They taught the part of me that is unnamed by anatomy books. And so I stand here facing you and the rest of creation, also with secret names. And once again, there is the great silence of what happened to the buffalo. And so hard it is to pray for the shooters who laughed about hitting the girl with one good shot. We love our horses. We love the dogs who helped us. We love the wilderness of buffalo herds. We are humans who love, but I don't know what they are, the shooters, or their purpose for being. With no words, just part of my named self, I hold this fan from old mother and the eagle. With all my strength, I send this prayer, so very silent. The eagle that I refer to was a golden eagle that I loved very much. And we became friends over the years. I was helping take care of it at the rehab foundation where I used to work. And when I couldn't fly up to roost with the other eagles way up in the flight cage. And so it would sit on a stump while I cleaned under it, and sometimes groomed my hair because it was never sleek enough for the flight. So it was my grandmother, I called it. This is called The Red Part. When I was a girl, the old women told me if I were always generous, I could paint a part in the middle of my hair with red. Red ochre, red paint, red lipstick, some even used. But it seemed not right to reveal to the world that I was generous, as if the announcement takes it back. So unlike other girls, I appeared selfish, even if I gave so much away. Who would have known I gave my buckskin dress, my leggings, moccasins, beaded so well, even the silver bands for my hair. I think of the many red parts, even the parting of the sea by Moses leading his people in a never-ending story, or the parting in the red stem of the plant for healing bad lungs, the splitting of the heart when one side works against the other, and the veins in their miles flow back again and again. But the red part I recall the most had to do with generosity, and then our giving up the taken land and forest to those who wanted it so. We parted with our clothing, our families, and our way. We left the red farewell of a blood trail along the land we walked, writing that became the book coming after us with words of truth. About myself. I come from a land once plenty. I come from the caves of the world and tall grasses where earth rises and falls as the ribs of a body, bones all in their hiding, but also as water rises and falls like breath with salt water tides, following the phases of moon. Yet the human signs are here in this two-legged animal, imperfectly woven, but twined well enough to be a burden basket, filled with the gatherings of today's work, returning home with a common hunger. But about myself, I am merely one brief living shine. This is called What We Kept. Good water. We had mountains, and you took down the trees so that rain felled the mountains. It was once enchanted with the song of golden winds, the silk thread of river, pollen from the medicine flowers you took. The whole world was the gold you wanted. In the past, we gave you our labor. We gave you our store of food, even the mats where you slept for a year, before we sent you away with burning arrows and your fat ran across earth. You took the plants from our beautiful woods on your ships to lands already destroyed. And even more of you arrived to take our homes while we still lived inside them. You took the birds from the rookeries of beautiful waters, feathers from hats, from near the mangroves, coats made from our animals, and all the time you lost so much, even taking, because you knew so little that a girl led the way to the fame of men, fed them, turned their canoes to safety. The more you took, the more you lost, and you need us now the way you needed us then, our land and labor, and we give to you knowledge you don't hear, the new mind you can't accept, our bone and leaf soup. But what I keep to myself, for myself, is the soul you can never have, that belongs to this land, the magic haunting you, still and always untaken, but you want, how you want, how you need. That first part was about the history of Desoto arriving here. And how our tribe behaved toward him, which was very mannerly, giving up our places of living, our food, giving up everything to them. And then realizing that they were going to kill us, which we already knew because there was a great network of people speaking and passing word along all the way up the coast and up the river, the Mississippi, and to all of the Tombigbee and the other rivers that used to be very wide and livable. It's funny because this is really not numbered correctly. I must have a galley and not the real book. So let me just keep looking for a few poems here. This is unique that I have that experience. Skin. It's the largest organ of the body, and I wish I could tell you what it was like to lose so much of it when being dragged until I was only blood. And the thin nerves of this body where one pain ends and another begins, far from where it started. Just like the underground strands of communication from tree to tree. Bark when I see you with an injury and the amber-colored sap like golden blood. I have to wonder if nerves are inside, if it hurts the same. I can't help but to bandage you. This is called Lost in the Milky Way. It's based on our own astronomy and the roads in which souls travel after death. And all of the tribal nations have their own astronomies. And I first learned this by discovering the Skiddy leather star bundle and discovering that for them, the Milky Way was a herd of antelope running. And I started then doing research on native astronomies and was very interested in all of them. I still am. Lost in the Milky Way. Some of us are like trees that grow with a spiral grain, as if already prepared for the path of the Spirit's journey to the world of all souls. It is not an easy path. A dog stands at the opening constellation before you can reach the great helping hand. The dog wants to know, did you ever harm an animal, hurt any creature, or take a life you didn't eat? This is only the first of our cosmic maps. There is another my people made of what is farther beyond this galaxy. It is a world that cannot be imagined by usual means. After the first, it could be a map of forever. It is a cartography shining only at certain times of the year, like a great web of finery. Some spider may have pulled it from herself to help you recall your true following, your first breath in the dark cold. The next door opens and old woman counts your scars. She is interested in how you have been hurt and not in anything akin to sin. From between stars are the worlds we now refuse, the words we now refuse, loneliness, longing, whatever suffering might follow your life into the sky. Once those are gone, the life you had against your own will, the hope, even the prayers, take you one more bend around that river of sky. Near the Washita River, which is as it passes through Oklahoma. I have this poem to read, and again, it's on the wrong page. So the great search continues. Never mind that poem. Oh, here it is. Okay. There's a big difference between 18 and 24, I just realized. Mathematician. Okay, so the river passes through what is clay and it moves it easily. And as it curves back and forth, it takes with it the clay. And so it disappears fast. And our first people who reached Oklahoma from the Trail of Tears settled were buried in a location where the river has now moved. And so our cemetery has been closed because some of the bones are exposed. And this one is called Bones at the River. We were water people, by the way, always on the Mississippi, where the different nations would know each other by their headdresses or their hairdos, their clothing, and their tattoos, or whether they wore a turban or what kind of clothing was worn. Many people don't realize that the Southeastern tribes in some areas did wear turbans rather than headdresses as the Northern Plains do. More people are familiar with the Northern Plains because they came last. We came first. with discovery and violence. Bones at the river. When the river changed course and washed land away, each bend grew sharper. Water takes what it wants. This time it says, I will take earth from where your people are buried. The river was once far from our graveyard, but this Washita changed course, stole earth, and carried it on the snaking back of its current. Now it passes through the place my people are buried. We are those who came from the ones who survived, buried in that place after walking the death trail from Mississippi, Misasipopna. We walked into this lost foreign place, having no home, no body of peace, just the papers with signatures of those who made promises not held. Now our bones are revealed like truth. We've taken up too from once invisible lives, lost names, lost horses, our lost relations, who would have loved us from some other place they do. And I think what they feel in that force of water we lived and traveled by, it was our life. So I say to the bones, yes, go. So the last one that I'm going to read, and there will be a little time probably left for a question or two, is the current veins of history. The current veins of history are open as worlds and borders redefine themselves. We wish for some new seed of vision so the world may grow, if only for a moment, silent, wordless, and fresh as a bare room with windows open. Friend, even you I may never know, none of us alike. We are all in the same current of life, each with our one-celled beginning, primordial life opening to step out toward years of life, with stories of those who birthed us. We hope flowing with love, even with childhoods of hurt from being human, and for a time, it all seems fine. In this moment of stopping, in the room safe with currents billowing, for just this moment, can't we touch one another and ask about our lives? Even the earth knows these veins that run like rivers of sweet water into countries great one day, gone the next, or flowing into one another to create something new. As we are silent in this moment, to be a friend, no weapon, not even arrows of words, just easy human waters together. Be like the animal that opens hardness and carries inside a pearl or a goddess that steps out to a new human accord. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda Hogan. And thank you for bearing with me, because I cannot believe that I didn't mention A History of Kindness, your new book, which I love, your new book of poetry, because I was holding it in my hand when I introduced you. I was just so close to it that I couldn't see it. So thank you. That was really beautiful. And you will find this book with other books by our stellar poets today in the Watershed online bookshop, bookshop.org/shop/watershed. And it is there. And also Lisa Rosenberg's book, A Different Physics. You can back order it from our online shop, but if you want to get it quicker, they have it in stock and you can order it online at Small Press Distribution, and the link is in the chat box. And I also just want to thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to our tech support, Poetry Flash assistant editor Rosalinda Monroy, Stephen Bunza, Molly Baldridge, everyone who helped to make Watershed happen. We're going to put these videos on the Poetry Flash YouTube channel very soon. And please do visit the Watershed page on poetryflash.org to see the gorgeous poem Broadside Awake, the poem by Linda Hogan that was pressure printed by book artist Lisa Rappaport with real leaves and grasses. So I'm going to leave you now. We're going to, the people that have joined us on Zoom can hang around for a moment and we'll say hello and goodbye after the recording ends. But thank you for joining us at Watershed.